A person who constantly calls attention to his trials and sufferings is in danger of developing a martyr complex and of making others feel that he is consciously seeking sympathy. It is possible for one to be self-centered in his self-denial and self-righteous in his self-sacrifice. This passage stuck out to me just because the way he looks at suffering, especially from someone who was obviously experiencing his own immense suffering through just, his activism, but even just culturally and more literally in, attempts at his life. And I think if someone like that can express how they feel about suffering and how it's kind of helped them through life in the sense of shape their way of thinking, I think it's pretty magical. My personal trials have also taught me the value of unmerited suffering. As my sufferings mounted, I soon realized that there were two ways that I could respond to my situation, either to react with bitterness or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. I decided to follow the latter course. Recognizing the necessity for suffering, I have tried to make of it a virtue. If only to save myself from bitterness, I have attempted to see my personal ordeals as an opportunity to transform myself and heal the people involved in the tragic situation which now obtains. And this goes back to, you can't really control what happens to you all the time, but you can totally control or how you let them shape your life. And I know sometimes you can't. It's sometimes more than others, right? Like, you get into a car accident, like you can't really decide this isn't gonna put me in the hospital or keep me, or keep me non-injured, but I love the two ways to respond, to either react with bitterness, right? So I would say for most of us, that's probably that knee-jerk reaction, right? Someone bumps into you, someone calls you a name or makes fun of you or something like that, right? Like what our first instinct, and maybe this is just something that's just so much deeper into humans and in a sense of defense, I guess, to react with bitterness seems like the first reaction, right? And you don't even really have to think about it sometimes. Like you can easily snap back at somebody and give them an insult in turn, or to seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. Like that definitely takes someone who's really fucking mentally strong. You know what I mean? Especially to be in that moment, whatever moment it is. And maybe it's not something you can do right in the moment, but if maybe over time you can, really look at that situation and try to see how it's either helped you or look at it in a way that you can have it push your life in a proper, maybe not proper, but a positive direction. He uses the term creative, which I think fits even better just because it can be applied in so many ways, right? Like you can have something negative happen to you, and then if you sit back and kind of collect your thoughts for a little bit and kind of take yourself out of the situation and just maybe look at it from a different perspective of how does this help me, or how can I turn this into something good, or how can I at the very least keep this from ruining my mental health, my mood, my attitude, or even just your direct energy towards that person or towards that situation, right? Because if something happens to you and you spend time just thinking about it, kind of reflecting on it, but reflecting on it in a way that it's not really constructive, and you're kind of just simmering and festering, it's that's energy wasted. And it's also so draining and so exhausting. And it's almost impossible to not do that, or at least go through that. It's easy for someone to hear this and just be like, oh, well, that doesn't apply to everything. There's severity for certain things. So if in regards to someone says about, well, what if someone reacts inflicts physical violence on you? And you got to remember, his whole platform was on extreme adherence to non-violence, and this was also in part of receiving the violence and never reciprocating it. 3 different views on the subject of violence. One is the approach of pure non-violence, which cannot readily or easily attract large masses, for it requires extraordinary discipline and courage. And the second is violence exercised in self-defense, which all societies from the most primitive to the most cultured and civilized accept as moral and legal. The principle of self-defense, even involving weapons and bloodshed, has never been condemned even by Gandhi, who sanctioned it for those unable to master pure nonviolence. And what do you do if someone inflicts violence upon you? I think for the most of us, the easy answer is to defend yourselves. And I personally think it should be. But it doesn't stop me from thinking about the virtuousness of having that mindset of not wanting to. And I think in practice, if over time you can achieve that mentality of letting someone inflict pain on you, and and this is more like I'm trying to compare the physical violence and the mindset of willing to take the brunt of it, and I'm trying to compare that into what if you take that into a mindset. Like, I'm not telling you to let everyone walk around and smacking the shit out of you, but what if you take that process or that thought process of willing to take the brunt of that pain and refusing to inflict it on others, and if we attribute that to just talking to people, or people saying mean things to us, or willing to humiliate us, or challenge us for the sense to defame, or to make fun of, or belittle, or to condescend. And if we can take this approach of, one, seeking to transform the suffering into creative force, and also this idea of pure nonviolence, of taking on that suffering and never inflicting it. What if you took that into debates, to arguments, to the way we communicated with each other? Someone's just berating you or whatever. What if we could get to a point where we were strong enough mentally, emotionally, and even physically to say, I'm not gonna play your game, I'm not gonna stoop down to your level, and turning it into a creative force? Or at the very least, not letting it control your actions by choosing what you do next, and allowing you to see that, to be in that mindset, which is really hard, especially in the moment. Like, I know I can't really do that, but I definitely want to get there to where I can see it in the moment, recognize it, see what that person is trying to do, or maybe they're not trying to do it, but it's happening. Remove myself from the situation mentally and physically, and say, no, I'm not gonna let this path take. I'm gonna take a different path, and I'm gonna choose how I react to the situation. I'm not gonna let the situation choose for me.